Greetings, my friends. This is Celeria Rosenkreuz, and on this episode of the Chronological Quran, episode 17, we shall be continuing on to Surah 74, the Cloaked One, and shall be reading through to Ayah 10. This chapter's introduction in Tafsir ibn Kathir was already heavily discussed, and all which I would consider to be actually introductory material rather than more direct textual analysis has already been read when we covered Surah 73. As such, we shall be directly moving on into reading this surah, which, as said multiple times prior to this, is thought by some to be the second surah which was revealed, even if this is not the traditional consensus. We begin with Ayah 1. O you who are covered up, arise and warn. Revere your Lord alone and glorify him. All of this is straightforward. It is an exhortation to spread the religion paired with a tease/insult from Jibreel, who seems to be calling him weak for running back to his wife and having her wrap him up, and in theory is the first of its kind in that respect within Islam, whereas previously it had only been said that Muhammad ought to serve Allah himself, with no necessary public display of such worship, though he was obviously being encouraged to conspicuously hold himself back from worshipping the other deities which his family had for generations set up and maintained worship for, being the ones who controlled the Kaaba. This, by the way, is somewhat interesting, insofar as the Quran criticizes the parties in Mecca which were benefiting from aristocratic, generational wealth. I do not have enough knowledge on the details of Muhammad's life to adequately address that subject and tease out precisely what sort of psychological or ideological implications the circumstances of his childhood and early wealth, or lack thereof, had upon his later thinking and way of life, so I do not think it is best to rush down that particular rabbit hole at this time, though I do think there is something interesting to be teased out there if someone with more knowledge were to dive into the subject. We continue on to Ayah 4, which reads, Purify your garments, and shun all forms of uncleanness. Do not bestow favors in order to seek from others a greater return. And for the sake of thy Lord, be patient. Here, Muhammad is being instructed essentially in all the prerequisites for priesthood in any major religion that features the worship of divine or spiritual entities. You need ritual purity, loyalty to the entity you serve, some level of humility, here expressed with an exhortation against greed, and a willingness to suffer and have some degree of deprivation in resources and power, whilst one's deity is not in favor. In these aspects, this is not special, but it is significant that this represents Muhammad essentially being prepared for his active and public ministry, with a little explanation and direction rather than just being made to figure everything out for himself. For that is what this passage represents, essentially Allah and or Jibreel declaring that Muhammad's former life and behaviors are over, and he must step into a new role, with new requirements that will be made upon him and his behavior. This is a sort of formal induction into prophethood as such. In a textual narrative sense, it could be argued that this also is justification for Muhammad's behavior, for it is not coming of his own volition, but as a result of divine command and sovereignty. Or so the Quran would seek to tell you. Moving on, we reach Ayah 8. Then, when the trumpet is sounded, that day will be a difficult day, far from easy for the disbelievers, far from easy for those without faith. Lastly, we end on a note of apocalypticism once more rearing its head in the pages of the Quran, with the implication that Muhammad will be waiting for that day to come. As is often the case in these matters, it makes it feel as if the time is very soon at hand as such. Obviously, that didn't actually happen, and thus the suggestion to be patient for that day, rather than say the days later in his life where Muhammad would be able to rule like a king, comes across as odd in retrospect. One could criticize the matter for its ambiguity, or that it makes it seem as if Allah was misleading Muhammad about the Day of Judgment, which wouldn't be out of character. Or one could claim that this is actually talking about the coming conquest of Mecca instead, and it is just made to seem like an apocalyptic prophecy to modern eyes. Regardless, the veracity of the passage is hard to gauge for its lack of clarity, which is not a win for Islam. This has been Celeria Rosenkreuz, and until next my words greet your ears, I bid you farewell, and God bless you all.